Okay, so today we're going to do a quick run through of the reverbs on the Cortex. So what I've got here is a basic preset with the new Kraken channel 1, just set to a little bit of crunch. As you can hear, very dry, so let's add some reverb to it. So I'm going to start with the plate reverbs because they have the majority of the reverb settings that you're going to come across in the other reverbs. So here we have the plate lush, the plate tight. If you notice, they all have the same settings and they default to the same values. So we hear the difference. So that's the plate. Here's the plate lush. You can hear you get a longer trail on that. And here's the plate tight. You can hear there's a much shorter tail there. So here's the tight. Here's the regular. And here's the lush. So the plate lush is actually the one that I use the most. I don't usually have a mix this high, so usually I'll use this as kind of a lush reverb, but I'll drop the mix down to maybe around 20%. So if we do this, maybe 22.5. So let's go through these settings here, because I think if you understand them for the plates, you'll understand them for the other reverbs as well. So obviously mix is the same as every other effect. It's mixing the dry signal with the affected signal. So decay is either represented as an amount of time or a percentage. Either way, it works basically the same. The more you turn it up, the longer a trail you get on the reverb. So what I mean by that is if I turn it up all the way, you hear that reverb just goes and goes and goes and goes. If I turn it all the way down, you could barely tell the reverb's there. So let's turn up the mix just so you can make sure to hear it. You hear it, the reverb's there, but it gets cut off right away. The pre-delay is the amount of time it takes before you start to get feedback. So if you think about what reverb is it's mimicking a sound in a space and those sound waves bouncing off surfaces and coming back at you. So think of the pre-delay is the amount of time it takes for your sound to get to the first surface and start to come back. So, if you keep that low, it's kind of, you get an immediate feedback. Whereas if it's higher, it takes a little bit longer. Now, this is only a difference between, 0.1 and 200 milliseconds. It's almost too short a time for an ear to recognize, but it does affect how the reverb feels and overall sound. So high pass and low pass is, these are EQ settings overall for the reverb that allows you to control whether it's a darker reverb or a brighter reverb. Typically, I don't touch these. If I am going to touch this, the only thing I might do is lower the low pass, which basically cuts more top end off just to keep it, darker. You can hear that's very dark versus if I go like this. So the damping, what damping is overall, and you'll see damping represented in different ways on different reverbs. The plate reverbs have a low filter and a high filter damping. So it breaks it up kind of by EQ range. Most of the other reverbs just have one damping control. And what damping is doing is it's mimicking the type of surface that you're reflecting off of. So if you think about it, a hard surface isn't going to dampen the sound at all. It's just going to feed it back at you. Where a softer surface is going to dampen some of the sound. And so what damping generally is doing is controlling how much of the sound the surface is absorbing rather than reflecting. And in this case, you can do that for low end and high end. So if I crank down the low end, meaning it's not absorbing any low end, but crank up the high end, we'll get a very dark reverb. Whereas if I do the opposite, you'll see it'll be much brighter. You're getting more of that top end coming back at you. Mod depth is, you can add a little bit of modulation to the reverb. It's basically so that the frequencies coming back at you are slightly altered. And this just makes it sound more real. You know, if you have no modulation, then the frequencies coming back are exactly the same and it can sound somewhat artificial. I don't usually play around with this setting. I usually leave it here at this 50% just to, again, to add that kind of natural sound. So the trails, what it does is it controls whether or not the reverb continues on after you turn the effect off. So if I hit a chord and turn it off, you should hear that the effect continues on. But if we turn off the trails and I hit the chord and then turn the effect off, you'll hear the effect will just stop. So usually I'll just leave trails on. And this is a setting that's there for delays and reverbs. Anything that has ambience to it, I typically leave it on because when you're switching back and forth between scenes or something, I mean, you want those sounds to continue because it sounds really unnatural to have that stuff just cut off. So those are the plate reverbs. So now let's go into some of the kind of room-based reverbs. So I'm going to start off with the ambience reverb and the room reverb. So both of these are really subtle reverbs that don't add a lot of effect. And so I might choose to use these if I was relying more on delay for my ambience. So for example, if you're trying to recreate the Andy Timmons Halo sound with the dual delays, he's actually not using any reverb at all, but obviously he's in a room. So what you may want to do is have either an ambience reverb or a room reverb and have that little bit of sense of being in a space, but without any kind of long trail. And I'll show you what I mean here. So the ambience, we've got our mix, we've got our pre-delay, we've got our EQ setting, we've got our trails. And it's, rather than have a decay setting, we just have a size. So small, medium, large. So if you hear what it sounds like, you can hear it's very subtle. I mean, if you turn up to large, you can hear it more. You can hear it's there. You're getting a sense that you're in a space, but you're not getting kind of a big blooming reverb. So again, I would use this if I wanted to just have that really subtle reverb because I'm relying more on delays for ambience. Same thing for the room reverb. You do get a decay here. That decay runs from 0.1 seconds to 2 seconds. And you have all your other familiar controls here. So a room reverb, you can hear it's really subtle. Now you can increase your delay if you want. But again, both these are pretty similar in terms of how I would use them. I would use them as I want a very slight reverb because I'm relying more on delays for my ambience. That's how I think of it. So let's pull in the cave and the hall and the mind hall. You don't want all three on. So the cave, again, all these are very similar in terms of the controls you have. The difference is going to be, what you'll see is the amount of decay that's available to you. So the cave is big. You can hear this has got 8-second decay. It goes all the way up to 20 seconds if you want, and it goes down to 5. So, you know, kind of a big boomy effect. The hall is same thing, except you notice the decay goes from 1 to 10. So rather than going from 5 to 20, it goes 1 to 10. And this is something I would use just to kind of mimic that kind of big guitar in an arena kind of thing. So if I had a lead tone, so that works really well. Maybe put a delay in front of it, you get that big swelling guitar sound. So then the mind hall will give you damping. And so the sound is a lot like the hall. The decay is based on percentage rather than time. And then you have control of the damping, so you can dampen these. But overall, it's pretty similar to the regular hall. So let's get into some of the modulated stuff. And this is where it starts to get a little fun. So the modulated reverb, what this is doing is, as you can tell from the title, is it's adding a certain amount of modulation control to this. So if you see, you've got a regular mix, decay, pre-delay, high pass, low pass, trails, but you have modulation speed and modulation depth. So it allows you to control some of that modulation stuff. So if we add depth and some speed, just to make it sound weird, you hear what it's doing there. If we put the speed low, we can't really notice it. But if you, alright, so the shimmer reverb has a lot of fun stuff to play with, because in addition to doing reverb, what it's doing is feeding back to you some pitch shifted tones. And so you've got your basic reverb controls. You got your mix. Let's turn that up so we can play around with this and hear it. You've got decay, you've got trails, you've got pre-delay, you've got damping, you've got a high pass. Rather than having a low pass, you've got a brightness control. And then you've got some things that control the modulation. So you've got a feedback. So that's the amount that the reverb is being fed back into its own kind of modulation. You've got a pitch shift effect, which right now out of the box is set to be an octave up. And then you've got a random pitch. And so that's introducing a small amount of variation. So you're not getting the exact kind of octave up pitch. You're getting more of a chorusy effect. And then you have a modulation speed and a modulation depth, which work just like they do for a chorus. But let's play around with the pitch a little bit here. So out of the box is using an octave. So if I hit a low note, what you'll hear is, as the reverb comes back to you again and again, you're going to hear that same note, but it's going to go up an octave and then go up an octave and then go up an octave. So if we increase the feedback, so that could be nice. So if you're just playing around, so you can even change the pitch. So if I go down to 7 semitones, which is like a fifth, you're getting a different kind of vibe to that, because it's not just feeding you back an octave, it's feeding you back almost a chord. So that's the shimmer. I just did a video on the reverse delay where I combine the shimmer with the reverse delay. It's a great effect. You put the shimmer reverb first and then you do a reverse delay on it. So the shimmer doesn't come in until a little bit later, so you can kind of play your line and then have the shimmer kind of come in with kind of all this beautiful lushness behind it. And then last but not least, we have our spring reverbs. So you see, these are the same. So we'll just go through the spring stereo here. You get a mix control, you get a kind of a tone control, which is just kind of an EQ overall. You get the boing, which is, it's almost like a depth control. It's like how much the spring is kind of moving. Then you've got a dampening control, which allows you to control, how long it kind of vibrates for. So the default settings are like this. So if you move the boing down, you're getting a different kind of vibration from the spring. And then you dampen it. As you dampen it, you can really hear there's not much reverb there at all. There's a little bit, but if you turn it all the way down, it just goes and goes and goes. So I don't use the spring reverb a lot. I'm more of a plate reverb guy. But these are there if you're looking for something that really sounds like kind of an old school amp with a spring reverb. But I much prefer the other reverbs on the Quiet Cortex. I hope you found this helpful. And let me know if you have any questions in the comments below. Otherwise, I'll see you next time. Thanks.